Hello and welcome. My name is Lisa Shirk, and I'm a professor here at the Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies at the University of Notre Dame. We welcome you today to this panel on civil resistance in Ukraine and the region. And this hour we'll be spending describing what is civil resistance and giving some examples and descriptions, including from people within Ukraine who are still there today. While most news agencies are focusing on military strategy, this panel is focusing on non-military, non-kinetic strategies. So we're just taking a different angle on what's happening on the ground and how our civilians, who are unarmed in many cases, responding to the Russian aggression. I'm going to start today by sharing a PowerPoint slide, set of slides about some of the examples. So that we can just have some illustrations. And I'll be introducing each of the speakers as they come online to speak. And Maria Stephan and her book, which is the classic textbook at this point on why civil resistance works, we'll go through a definition in a few moments. So we'll be defining this term for you if you're not familiar with it. But just to look around the country in Ukraine and the region, thousands of Ukrainian citizens have blocked Russian tanks at the nuclear power plant in Zaporizhia. Thousands have participated in anti-war protests within Russia. Ukrainians are removing and altering signs to confuse and insult Russian forces. This one in blue here shows that all roads lead to The Hague, referring to the International Criminal Court. And other signs are saying Russian soldiers stop, Putin lost, the whole world stands with Ukraine, go away without blood on your hands. References to the oligarchs and references to imploring Russian soldiers to stop and to look at themselves and have their kids look at what they're doing. In Odessa, citizens are preparing sandbags to block Russian military advancement. Citizens are welding together anti-vehicle obstacles in Lviv. In other parts of the world, they're welding larger anti-tank obstacles, or they're making these kinds of civil road barricades. Civilians are making camouflage nets. And civilians are, when a Russian soldier is captured, they are talking to them and finding out what they have been told in their own country about them. So to begin, we're going to have Maria Stephan to give some historical context to where this term comes from, again, referring to her book, Why Civil Resistance Works. Maria is the chief organizer of the Horizons Project and is the co-author of this award-winning books. So Maria, if you can come online, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Lisa. And thanks to you and to the Kroc Institute for organizing today's event and for helping to shine a light on, I think, the underappreciated role of civil resistance in Ukraine and in the tragedy that continues to unfold there, and also highlighting its relevance for Russia and for the region. So grateful to you all. And I'm really honored to be with this really remarkable lineup of speakers today. It's been really cool getting to know some of them over the past couple of weeks. And I must say, I'm just especially grateful for the role of the organizers on this panel. And they're all representing different groups and organizations in Europe, the US, and beyond, and the role that they're playing in amplifying the civil resistance and nonviolent action that's happening in Ukraine, Russia, the region, and importantly, in coordinating support for nonviolent action, civil resistance, and peace building. So that is such an important aspect of international support. And so I'm just so grateful to all of these individuals and organizations that have come together to support nonviolent, non-military solutions in the region. So as Lisa mentioned, it's true that this is we're talking about a brutal military invasion and now an interstate war between two sovereign countries. And, I should say I'm sadly quite familiar with Vladimir Putin's playbook, having worked on Syria at the State Department when Putin backed the Assad regime and dropping barrel bombs using chemical weapons. For a time, I worked with a Russian human rights organization that was focused on the human rights atrocities in Chechnya. So kind of the tactics of scorched earth, the targeting of civilians is just sadly all too familiar. So we're talking about an interstate war context, yet we're seeing profound acts of civil resistance in Ukraine, in Russia, in the region. So when I'm using the term civil resistance, what I'm talking about is a method for actively prosecuting conflict involving nonviolent, non-military means of direct action. So tactics like protest, vigils, sit-ins, blockades, strikes, civil disobedience, other acts of organized non-cooperation. And these tactics are used to strip power away from an opponent and to build power up for a movement. And so, you know, the purposes for civil resistance and how civil resistance is being used now in Ukraine and Russia in the region. First, it's being used to slow and thwart the military invasion and aggression. Lisa showed the pictures of the changing of the signs, you know, trying to create confusion for Russian, you know, military vehicles, acts of nonviolent sabotage, targeting kind of installations. So, you know, and protests and demonstrations to kind of slow and deter Russian invasion and occupation. So that's one primary purpose. Another purpose is to protect civilians and to mitigate violence and essentially to buy time for people to escape and to flee. You all have probably been seeing the, you know, the remarkable humanitarian work by Ukrainians, by international organizations to support those who are trying to, you know, both stay in place, but also to flee the fighting and aggression. And not organized nonviolent action can be used to kind of slow the onslaught, if you will, and also allow time for people to change their locations and get out of harm's way. Civil resistance is also used to change the political calculations inside Ukraine, inside Russia, importantly, and in the court of public opinion. And, you know, we'll talk a little bit about how kind of the different tactics of civil resistance are being used to shift power and to put pressure on Vladimir Putin inside Russia. And another, you know, purpose of civil resistance in this context, and we were talking about this before we went live today, is to deter future aggression. And, you know, interestingly, we've seen that this methodology of civilian-based defense, which is basically a methodology for mass nonviolent non-cooperation, how this strategy has already been integrated into the national security strategy of Lithuania. And it's certainly a large part of the Baltic states thinking and action. And so how people and citizens can organize nonviolently to repel future aggression and to refuse cooperation in the event of future invasions is a very interesting, unfortunate, but interesting aspect of what we're seeing in Ukraine in the region. So, you know, what we know about effective nonviolent resistance campaigns, which, by the way, have been effective historically in about 50% of the cases in challenging authoritarian regimes. So what we know about successful campaigns is that first, they tend to involve large and diverse segments of any population. So when you have large groups of people from, students, women, mothers, professionals, media professionals, religious leaders, different, groups and pillars in societies refusing to go along with the status quo and saying no, this can translate into significant power shifts. And so, I think it's interesting to pay attention inside Ukraine, where already like probably every segment of Ukrainian society is engaged in some form of mass resistance and dissent at this point. But I think hearing what the Russian speakers in Ukraine are saying and what they're doing could be an interesting dynamic to look for, and what they're saying about the war, I think, is one interesting population inside Ukraine. And, in Russia, probably the Russian people are in the best position to stop Putin's aggression. They have the most power and the most leverage at this point. And I think, Russian mothers in particular are, a population that I think Putin may fear the most. And, paying attention to what they say, how they protest, acts of defiance and non-cooperation, like we saw the state media broadcaster who held up the sign, "No to war." I mean, so when large numbers of people from different parts of society engage in dissent, that can have a tremendous impact on kind of the political dynamics. So large, diverse participation, and then expanding the repertoire of nonviolent action. And we've seen so much of this, so much creative tactics that Ukrainians, Russians, and others have used. And I think especially in Russia, where there's so much fear, there's so much propaganda, there's so much manipulation of historical grievances, thinking about how, the fear levels can be lowered, and how low risk tactics can be used by ordinary Russians, and acts of dispersion. So we often think of large protests and rallies and demonstrations, but how can kind of smaller scale acts of dispersion be used to kind of demonstrate dissent and the like? So expanding the repertoire of nonviolent action. And finally, defections. So the role of, defections happening in key pillars of support, notably in the security forces. So when Lisa showed the picture of the Russian soldiers kind of being greeted with coffee and whatever, and essentially defecting, and there's a difference between prisoners of war and defectors. And so most of these soldiers are actually defecting from the battlefield. So how can those actions be supported? How can military and economic elites be encouraged to defect? These are the dynamics, and people need to see themselves in the future. So people defect when they feel pressure, and also when they see themselves in the future kind of society that they're living in. So these are all a few kind of key dynamics that I think are important to look for as as the kind of situation continues to unfold in Ukraine.
Thank you so much, Maria. And next, I'll invite Andrei Kamenshikov to come on camera if you're able. Andrei is joining us from Kyiv, where he is the regional representative of Nonviolence International and also the Global Partnership for the Prevention of Armed Conflict, GPPAC, in the post-Soviet states. He's been working at developing local capacities for peace for 3 decades. And I've been lucky to be his colleague for many of those years. Andrei, you're invited to share with us how you've been supporting peace building in the region.
Yes, hello. First of all, I get a message that my camera was turned off by the organizers, so I can't turn it on. Okay, now I think I can. Let's see. Hi. Hello from Kyiv. Thank you for this opportunity. And indeed, I agree that this war, this tragedy of immense proportions, is, among other things, what it is showing is a plethora of all kinds of approaches towards civil resistance, and various nonviolent strategies that are being used by different groups in both Ukraine and Russia and Belarus, by the way, as well, to try to put an end to this insanity, this really insane war that had absolutely zero reasoning, nothing except some very weird concepts in the minds of one person or a very small group of people. However, I would like to also speak a little bit about some of the issues and the challenges that are today, that we're facing today. and including challenges that are related to the use of various civil resistance tactics and various tactics of nonviolent resistance. I agree with everything that Maria said, but I should also mention that there are some very serious questions we need to keep in mind when we as we try to put light on all these great examples that we see today. For example, the question that Russian people are in the best position to stop Putin's aggression, theoretically, yes, but we should understand that in reality, unfortunately, the vast majority of people in Russia live in a whole different information world today, in a world where their country is not an aggressor against a neighboring state, but is actually trying to save its future, or trying to save or trying to defeat Nazism in the neighboring country. That is the picture that's being implemented, that's being introduced by all Russian state media. And as you probably know, recently there was a crackdown on almost all independent media channels in Russia. Luckily, we still live in the internet age, and there are still technical means of getting objective information about what's going on. But the truth is that the vast majority of the population is not very used to searching for alternative means of information. The new laws that were introduced over the last few weeks in Russia make it a major criminal offensive to question the official policy of the Russian government, and it's basically to challenge what the government is doing in its war against Ukraine. Even the term war is not welcomed. The official term is a special military operation. People can end up with a prison sentence of 15 years if they challenge this. This is significantly more than you can get for murdering someone in Russia. So that's the reality that we have to face. And in my understanding, the developments of the following months will depend to a very great extent on the answer to one simple question. Will Mr. Putin be able to have, obviously not all, but a significant portion, maybe a majority of his own people, to believe his version of events? After the first week of fighting, when it became obvious that the illusion that many people, obviously Putin himself and his close surroundings, but probably many people in the political elite of Russia had, that it would be technically possible to have a quick victory and to install a new government in Ukraine that would be pro-Russian in the way they thought of that. After it became obvious that this was a total failure, they have been facing a dilemma, either to back off, to seek some kind of negotiated settlement, and whatever that would be, it would be basically a defeat in regards to the objectives, the goals that were officially stated when Russia began its aggression, or to move from the concept of a small victorious and fast victorious war to a war that is been sold to their own population as an existential war for the future of Russia. And that's what they're trying to do right now. So one of the ways that we need to, that if we want to influence the events in the future events in regards to Russia's war against Ukraine, we need to find ways to interfere with this attempt of the government and Putin's propaganda to implement this idea that this is really a war for the survival of Russia, for a war that Russia cannot lose. That's what they're trying to sell to their own population. And as one practical step that I think could be useful in this situation, I would propose to create a kind of international nonviolent platform in support of Ukraine that would provide, that could help provide on a daily basis or on a regular basis, provide advice on key areas that are related to the nonviolent aspects of the struggle of the Ukrainian people for their freedom, and also the aspects of this information war that the Russian leadership is carrying out primarily against their own people right now. So I know that time is very limited.
Thank you so much, Andre, for sharing those perspectives. And you remind us that digital technologies have fundamentally shifted communication around the world. And now it's digital technologies are part of the strategy of civilian resistance to combat these narratives that, as you note, Putin is saying. So thank you so much for that strategy and that idea of organizing a global platform. Next, we'll hear from Kai Brand-Jacobsen, who's the president of the Romanian Peace Institute, Patrir. And Patrir has been calling many of us together who have been working on civil resistance over the last few decades to help coordinate an international peace response. Kai, if you can come on, and let me also just say to the audience, if you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A, and I'll invite panelists to already start to answer any of those questions that you're able to respond to. Just make sure you're on mute so that we can't hear your typing. Okay, thank you, Kai.
Thank you very much, Lisa, and thank you to everyone who is joining us today from inside Ukraine, from Russia and Belarus. If you are able, from around the world, and in this extraordinary panel, it is a privilege to be here together. I'm going to dive right in because we don't have that much time all together. And I as well agree with everything that has been said by my colleagues before, but I would add just one nuance to what you were sharing, Andre, and I so strongly support it overall. And I would say it is not only about how effective Putin is in convincing the people of Russia and continuing his narrative, but it is also a question of how effective we will be in bringing about a countering and a challenge to that narrative and direct support for people in Russia who are themselves working to challenge it. I would like to speak briefly about the incredible beauty and the strength and power of nonviolence as an effective method for addressing invasion, occupation, and the current war in Ukraine. And I want to just share some of what has already been touched upon to show the breadth of it. So sabotage is right on the border when we're looking at nonviolence or otherwise, but you're having widespread use of sabotage by civil resistance actors across Ukraine to make the logistics and the support of the Russian invasion more difficult. You're having the widespread practice of non-cooperation, civil resistance, and civil disobedience, as Lisa shared with us, from civilians blocking tanks to standing in front of transport lines to an entire breadth and range of nonviolent actions, and amazing creativity and courage in tremendous challenge. You're having both from within Ukraine and globally hackers who are hacking onto Russian state, energy, military, and other platforms and trying to disrupt from that space, from anonymous to inside Ukraine to a range of actors globally. But in addition to non-violence, you're also having a breadth of actions that could be considered as not violence. So not direct non-violent action, but they are incredibly important and symbolically powerful for challenging the war and for strengthening the spirit of the Ukrainian population that is resisting. In the midst of wartime situations, you're having across Ukraine open air concerts. You're having civilians come together, providing humanitarian response and solidarity, helping to support those who are in need and affected by the war. And you're having this act of defiance of when there has been an attack, destruction on an area, civilians and people coming out to clean it up, to reclaim, to not accept the devastation and destruction that the Russian armed forces and increasingly mercenaries and international armed groups that are being brought in as well to support the war are doing. I want to focus also just briefly and so vitally on the incredibly courageous resistance we're seeing inside Russia. And one thing that we should say is this is particularly coming from women and feminist organizations, from youth organizations, and also the importance, I believe it was Maria who said it, of babushkas, of the mothers, the grandmothers, the families of soldiers being sent to the front who are not accepting this is something that we need to key into and understand. There have been arrests and protests, and I want to hear what Andrei shared with us, the incredible pressure that people are under inside Russia. When I hear people speak with understandable anger and frustration sometimes that how can people in Russia accept this? Why aren't they standing up? I invite us just to think for a moment that currently we still have weapons being provided and used from the United States government, the British, the German, the French, the Spanish, on a much more devastating and overwhelmingly destructive war in Yemen, which has killed incomparably more children and civilians. And that's our weapons that are being used there for those that are coming from the West. And now the difference is we have access to all the information in the world if we want to. Okay, we knew the justifications for the invasion of Iraq were complete lies and that there was a manipulation. We actively were involved in Libya in supporting ongoing the war in Yemen, and we have access to information to be able to resist. Now in Russia, the situation is actually much worse. We stood by over more than a decade while Putin strangled civil society in Russia, while organizations were shut down, while they were pressured, while people were arrested, while people were assassinated, human rights workers, NGO workers, politicians, dissidents, journalists. We have to understand that for the overwhelming majority of the population in Russia, particularly in rural and small town areas, they're getting their news from television channels that are state controlled. Opposition websites have been shut down. NGO websites have been shut down. So it is much more challenging. And in addition to that, the threat of reprisal that people face if they do stand up, the prison sentences and everything else. And yet there have been more than 15,000 recorded and organized demonstrations across Russia, from single people standing and singing the Ukrainian songs and anthem or calling for resistance, to athletes who have been protesting, and Russians abroad who are joining and raising their voices in opposition to the war. I want to speak to the incredible importance of all of us at a global level also reaching out to the Russian armed forces and soldiers to support desertions. As a group of organizations that Lisa and others have mentioned, coming together from around the world to see how we can support nonviolence in Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia, have said, we would like to encourage and actively call upon every government in the European Union and governments internationally to proclaim a direct official message to the soldiers of the Russian armed forces to encourage their desertion and their safety if they leave the forces involved in the war, or also desertion from forces further back in Russia. We need to also do what the American armed forces did with the Iraqi army when they sent them digital messages and others to encourage them not to fight during the 2003 invasion. We need to be using every technological resource we have to reach out to Russian officers, to soldiers, to let them know, as the sign that Lisa shared shows, roads lead to The Hague if they continue in this illegal war and war crime that is being carried out, but also to encourage them to dissent. Lisa, did you want to show me 1 minute left, or how are we doing?
Yes, please.
All right. So very briefly, there is broad-based dissent. We're seeing also a number of key financial actors. It's important to understand The business sector in Russia does not like Putin. He has strangled it. He's placed it under incredible difficulty. There are those whose life and wealth are based upon him, and there's a strong chance they will go down with him, but that does not represent the broad-based business sector. Super quickly in conclusion, or rather the beginning of an incredible journey and critical struggle ahead. Nonviolence is an incredibly powerful and effective tool of resistance, including in situations of war and invasion, and we have many examples to back this up. It can make occupation effectively impossible if it is implemented well, which means strategically, to the spirit of nonviolence, and at a sufficient scale. It is an instrument and way of struggling to overcome the war that can be supported, and this is critical. And here, as has been mentioned, we have launched together with organizations around the world a global platform, All for Peace, which is working to provide direct support on 3 fronts: in Ukraine, to civil resistance and organizations carrying out nonviolence, through training, information, solidarity and support, resources. Inside Russia and Belarus, a much more critical challenge, but one of those that we will face, also looking at how to get out messages to the people of Russia to support the resistance to the war and how to reach them. And globally, recognizing it is not enough for all of us around the world to applaud or to encourage resistance in Ukraine and Russia. We need to be getting involved also to prevent the further militarization and escalation of the war by irresponsible actions on the side possibly of our governments, and to not allow the further division within Europe and within the world that could come after this, and the further dramatic increase in military spending, which is already higher than at any point of the height of the Cold War. It is open to organizations practically engaging in or wanting to support direct, effective nonviolent resistance in Ukraine, Russia, Belarus, sorry for the error there, and globally and in our countries. And especially, my last is to appeal to citizens around the world, students, artists, athletes, local government organizations, tech companies, business people, musicians, journalists. If you have ever known anyone in Ukraine, write them a message and support them. If you've ever known anyone in Russia or Belarus, or if you're part of organizations which do business there, or have associations there, or have colleagues there, write to them, listen to them, and encourage them to stand up and to end the war. One of the most vital forces that can contribute to ending the war is the decision and choice you take or don't take to step up and to make it end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kai. That was very powerful. Next, I will introduce Felipe Daza, who is a research coordinator at the Observatory on Human Rights and Business in Barcelona, a professor at Sciences Po in France, as well as the National University of Kyiv. And one of his students, Katerina Korpalo, who is a university student from the university in Kyiv, will join Felipe in presenting some of their research to try to map and record the different civil resistance strategies. Please come on camera. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Lisa. Yeah. So, well, thank you very much, to Coexistence to organize this important event, and in this important moment. I really agree with all the interventions we had. I would like to make some key, inputs, and I know also I have limited time, so I would like to give also space to my student, Katerina Korpalo, to add, how we are building a cooperation between the practitioners on nonviolence and also researchers from the University Mohila Academy. So I would like to connect, my interpretation of nonviolence about one of the key points that Maria was mentioning. When we approach nonviolence, we understand nonviolence as the capacity to transform societies. The social transformation process that we can build through nonviolence is very important in order to tackle the structural causes that are provoking and generating violence, injustice, inequalities. And this is quite connected to the element of building power. So apart from these nonviolent actions that we are, watching on television and social media, it's very important to pay attention to the community organizing element, the connection, solidarity, and the specific ties between activists from Belarus, European Union, Russia, or Ukraine. This is very, very important because this is what is going to build a new society. And I think if we pay attention to the last chapters of nonviolence in Ukraine since 2004, like Orange Revolution, and the 2014 Euromaidan, we can see a turning point in type of how, citizens and civil society in Ukraine is perceiving also nonviolence. I think it was in more clear vision about the future and a more clear, adoption of democratic values, transparency, and values on building a different society. And I think, in my opinion, one of the main concerns of Russia, or especially, let's say Putin, is not only about the NATO expansion, but is the contagious effort of democracy. And I think that we need to understand that a successful democracy in Ukraine to have a snowball effect in Russia, but also in Belarus. So this is very important that to support non-violence as a social transformation process. So our organization, NOVAC, in cooperation with the global campaign, we are supporting non-violence with these two levels: the urgent need that the civil society has, to confront the invasion and the occupation, in combination with the long-term transformation. On the one hand, I think it's very important to support non-violence strategy to avoid the opponent to achieve its military objectives. Also to undermine the will of the opponent, especially the army, the soldiers that are, occupying some regions and cities of Ukraine, and to combine this level with the long-term process, which is more focused on reinforcing the national unity, solidarity, and the non-violent discipline of the population, and also protect and consolidate the democratic principles. So in the framework of the global campaign, NOVAC and different organizations from Europe, US, Latin America, we are working at different levels, from policy engagement, political communication, where we think that it's very important to amplify and to visualize the voices, the demands, and the actions of the non-violent actors inside Ukraine and in other areas of the region, but also to support to provide direct support to non-violence actors. So how we are doing that? Our cooperation is mainly focused at basically now on mapping the non-violent actions, also identifying what are the actors that are behind these non-violent actions, and then provide this direct support. How we are doing that is basically, engaging in a systematic research process in cooperation with different organizations, part of the global campaign All for Peace, but also in cooperation with 40 students from the National University Kyiv Mohila Academy. Katerina is going to explain more in detail the type of research we are doing. But I would like to mention that so far the type of, let's say, dimensions we are finding in the non-violence action are the ones actions that are happening in context of liberated areas, so actions against the invasion, and some other actions more in the occupied context. I would like to share with you very briefly 2-3 slides where we can see specific actions happening. Already there are some of them that have been shown, but I think that these ones are very important. These are one of the first actions happening in the liberated areas, that how citizens are blocking military convoys or even tanks. And these are, we see, specific, victories and successful effects, where we saw tanks turning around, because the citizens were blocking. Also, civil disobedience or non-cooperation. So people that are refusing to show the IDs or the passports, to the occupiers. These are very, very important, actions, and very brave, from the side of the Ukrainian population. We also identify, and this is very important, actions in the Luhansk and Donetsk region. This is breaking the narrative that these regions have this pro-separatist feeling, which is in some areas is happening the opposite. These are two specific, locations, Makivka, where there are happening, actions against the occupiers, and we have verified this information with our students. In the process of mapping, we are also facing different challenges. For example, the verification process. There is, as you know, in the context of misinformation and fake news, it's very complicated sometimes to verify some of the actions. For example, in Kherson, one of the main challenges was that we have different images, pictures, videos about different actions. And sometimes we think that there is the same action, from different angles. So what we are doing is that we're trying also to define concrete chronicles with all the actions happening in the different cities. This is a very important work, being done by our researchers and our students. We are, writing down every of the actions happening in, for example, cities like Kherson. And apart from this verification process, well, I would like to mention that, and this is also connected with some of the pictures that my colleague Kai was also showing, the one of the largest sabotage actions targeting the railways lines in Belarus. This is showing something very important. It's showing also the capacity of the community organizing, from countries from Belarus. And in Belarus, one of the key, let's say, or added values of nonviolence that they are building a very solid and resilient dissidence structure. They are waiting the momentum, but for the moment, they are organizing this type of action and transferring information to other activists inside Ukraine. They are part of also of the campaign. They would like also to support Ukrainian activists and Russian activists to create the contradictions needed, to affect the pillars of power of Putin and Lukashenko and other authoritarian regimes in the region. So I will stop here because I would like to also give the time to my colleague Katerina Korpalo. So thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Am I audible? Okay.
Yes.
So yeah, I would like to talk briefly as well. Who am I? As Philippe already said, I'm a representative of the International Relations Club of Kyiv Mahila Academy. And since the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion, part of our club members who were relatively safe created a group called Media Offensive to work on an international front line and combat Russia's disinformation. And there are approximately 40 people in our group. And I would like to talk briefly about the things we are doing and our motivation. And why we decided to engage in Philippe Gaza's project, because frankly speaking, Ukrainians themselves didn't expect such resistance from our nation. And that's why we wanted to dig deeper and explore acts of non-civil resistance more. Besides, I think that our cooperation with Philippe is an incredible opportunity to support activists and praise Ukrainians' deeds of bravery. As for our organizations, we have a few goals, and our main goal is to keep Ukraine and the Russian war on the media agenda. We know that sometimes Europeans and the world get tired, and that's why we communicate with different media and newspapers and help them to receive and share trustworthy and reliable information uninfluenced by Russian manipulations. Second, we want to convey the message that there's not only Putin who is responsible for the war, but also Russians, which stay silent or which support the regime. Third, we fact-check news and dispel myths sparked by Russian federations. And fourth, we collect information about Russian war crimes and other crimes and disseminate this information to hold Russia accountable for them. Philippe already talked about some acts of civil resistance, and I would like to talk about the three things which I find extremely important and talk about their significance. I will talk only briefly about the two of them and more broadly about the third. The first is protests in occupied cities. Second is we were really shocked when we learned that people meet Russian soldiers barehanded and they are not afraid of weapons and shootings. And third, that people dismantle road signs in order to mislead Russian soldiers. And I was really pleased how they are united and how well they work together. So I would like to talk more about the protests in occupied cities and why it is extremely important. Philippe talked about the protests in Kherson, but every day we see a lot of them. We see protests in Berdyansk, in Kherson, in Melitopol, in Ganishevsk, in Novakhovka, in those cities which now are temporarily occupied by Russian soldiers. And why it is so significant? Because Russians in those places has already started employing repressions. They shooting in the air using tear gas, and Russian soldiers massively persecute and detain people with pro-Ukrainian views, kidnap mayors and activists, and exert severe pressure on civilians. And nevertheless, people continue going out, people continue protesting, people continue singing national anthems, and we see some refusals to accept appointed Russian officials. We see civil disobedience of illegitimate laws and unacceptance of aggressors' humanitarian aid. And I would like to, I see you'd like to talk about the briefly challenges that we are facing. We face like two key challenges. It's in identifying people and establishing context for them, like mapping actors, because people are very cautious because of possible Russian agents. And the second is that it's hard for us, for example, to confirm 100% of the information, because we have a lot of YouTube videos and a lot of those things which are difficult to verify. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to both of you for sharing. Next will be Reverend Karen Dickman. Karen is the President, Executive Director of the Institute for Multi-Track Diplomacy, and IMTD has been active in Ukraine for many years, and she'll describe their economic activities, so a different line of civilian activities. Karen.
First thing we did when we started working in Ukraine is we worked with.
If you're a little bit hard to hear, if you can get closer to your microphone.
Okay. First thing we did when we started working in Ukraine was we understood that we wanted to do an economic development program, but that there were a lot of people who were not going to survive long enough to participate in it if we didn't do something in the intermediate. So we opened a series.
I'm sorry, Karen, we can't hear you. It seems to be going in and out. I don't know if the microphone, if you can bring it even closer to your.
Okay.
Sorry.
It's all right. I have a good Wi-Fi, so I don't know.
Okay, it's better now.
All right. First thing we did in Ukraine was we opened up a chain of food banks along with the Orthodox Church to make sure that people were going to be able to benefit from our economic development program. And then we started recruiting volunteers and then members. People started to join the organization as paid members. And the benefit of this economic development program for the members is that it allowed them to connect with other members to build, because for instance, if you're a strawberry farmer and you only have an acre of strawberries, you can probably, you can support a very local small market. But if you join up with 10 other strawberry farmers, then together you have enough to be of interest and of service to a larger domestic or perhaps even international market. And so that's what we did. We started building supply chains and combining people and providers and farmers and manufacturers together so that they could meet larger supply chains and then take part in larger markets. And it's been extremely successful. We have right now, I don't know how many thousands of members in Ukraine. As a matter of fact, just this last Saturday, we do a weekly television broadcast, and there was over 1.5 million views on that. But one of the things that, as soon as the war started, though, we just stopped the economic development program and switched over to 100% humanitarian aid at the request of the government. We actually do work with, as a partner, the Ministry of Social Policy, and are in conversation with other ministries of the government, and certainly with all the oblasts. So now we are focusing 100% on humanitarian aid. Right now we have 100 tons of food and water and medical supplies trying to get into Mariupol. so Russians have not let us in. We have another 20 tons now on their way to Kharkiv. And almost all of that has come out of the homes and the pockets of our members. There are millions and millions and millions of dollars of aid money going into Ukraine right now, but we don't see most of it going into the more difficult to reach areas. So that comes from us. One of the things that we are doing, though, along with that aid that is significant to this conversation, is that when our members encounter Russian soldiers who are occupying an area, they will gift them something, be it a pastry, an orange, a pair of gloves, or whatever, out of the aid that they are giving, and being very clear that it's not welcome to the invasion. We're glad you're here, but it is, we recognize that you are a human being in that uniform. And we do that for two reasons. One, to soften the hearts of the Russian soldiers, but also to keep the hearts of our own members soft towards the Russian people. We understand full well that when we are working in a country like Ukraine, we also have a similar program in Georgia, that what we are doing is revolutionary in a sense. It is deeply, deeply democratic in that they design everything, they design the program entirely on their own. We just give them the framework and the principles. But the effect of it is revolutionary because the two basic fundamental principles are transparency and accountability. And then they have also taken on, together we can do everything. So we are very careful only to work with other organizations that are also accountable and transparent. In a country that is known for its corruption, like Ukraine, to have a growing body of the population that is committed to accountability and transparency pulls the government in that direction. And to the degree that the government is willing to be accountable and transparent with the population, that is the degree to which we are willing to work with them. In Georgia, for instance, we have been asked, can we just lead a revolution? And we say, no, work with us and you won't need a revolution. You'll have a revolution not of government, but of governance, because it really doesn't matter who is who is leading your government so long as they're doing it well. And if they can do that in an accountable and transparent way that recognizes the democracy of the people, then they're going to do a better job of it. So our goal here is with Ukraine. We've been there this long. We're going to be there through the war, no matter what the outcome is. We are going to stay with it because we know that a country cannot be occupied permanently that will not wish to be occupied. But when this is over, we will also start working in Russia, with the thinking there being not to undermine Putin at all, actually to strengthen Putin. Because if Putin were, the thinking is that if Putin were the president of a country that had a strong economy and that was participating constructively with the community of nations, he would be respected, much like Angela Merkel, and this war would not have been necessary. It would be a revolution in governance.
I'm sure that will spark some conversation. The Q&A chat is already very active. Thank you very much, Karen. Our last panelist today is Professor David Courtwright, also a professor here at the Kroc Institute at the University of Notre Dame. And David has been coordinating a group of US veterans to urge defections within the Russian military. David, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lisa, and thanks to all the panelists for this great discussion. As you mentioned, I've been asked to talk about defections, and Maria and others here have mentioned that. And we've seen some press reports, although they're not verified yet, that some Russian units are laying down their arms, refusing to fight, maybe sabotaging their equipment, indications of low morale. And I've had experience with that from my own service in the US military during the Vietnam War. I was one of those who spoke out against the war, and there were many thousands, tens of thousands of soldiers and veterans who resisted the war as part of the broader anti-war movement that forced the US to withdraw from Vietnam. And I've also over the years had a lot of contacts and provided support for US service members who served during the illegal US invasion and occupation of Iraq, and many of whom also resisted. So my colleagues and I, who were part of these resistance movements, have come together to offer an open letter to Russian soldiers. And here's a few of the paragraphs. Dear fellow soldiers, we write as former soldiers and veterans of US wars in Vietnam and Iraq. Many of us publicly protested and refused to participate in those wars. Some of us were punished or imprisoned for our dissent and acts of resistance, but we could not in good conscience support what we considered unjust wars of aggression against the peoples of Vietnam and Iraq. You have been ordered to participate in a war of aggression against the people of Ukraine. No soldier should be required to fight in such an unjust mission. The International Court of Justice at The Hague has ordered Russia to halt its invasion. The orders you have received to invade and attack the people of Ukraine are in violation of international law. We urge you to listen to your conscience and follow the path of truth and justice. We stand in solidarity with you and all fellow soldiers who support the cause of peace. We think this letter will hopefully have an impact. We hope to send it in the coming days. It's an especially appropriate time because on April 1 is National Conscription Day in Russia. And as we know, their army depends on conscripts. 130,000 conscripts will begin the recruitment process at that time. And it's important as we think about encouraging resistance to think about how we can support soldiers who speak out. As Kai said, we need to encourage European governments and the US to offer asylum to all those who resist, who desert from the Russian military. And as Karen just said, to show humanity toward those soldiers. During our day in the Vietnam War, anti-war protesters offered flowers. They offered support for the soldiers. And before long, many of us were beginning to support the anti-war movement. Let me just say a word about civil resistance strategy in the US and Europe. And Kai mentioned the point of preventing further militarization in the West. I think it's critically important. We already are hearing calls in the US Senate for more military spending, for increases in nuclear weapons. This would be a tremendous mistake, I believe, and it's something that we have to speak out against. And argue instead of providing more nuclear weapons and other large weapons, that the US should be strengthening European civil resistance and working to encourage exactly the kinds of strategies that have been talked about here in this conversation. Veterans of peace research will remember that there is a long tradition of encouraging non-military resistance. The 1974 book by Anders Bostrup and Andrew Mack called War Without Weapons, which outlined means of countering and undermining military aggression without war or nuclear weapons. Or Gene Sharp's 1985 book, Making Europe Unconquerable. As we've indicated on this panel, the strongest defense and resistance against Russian aggression is the planning and development of mass civil disobedience, obstruction, sabotage, and non-cooperation on an unprecedented scale. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. We are almost at the top of the hour and some of our panelists have to leave. So I want to just pause and say thank you to each of you for your fantastic presentations this afternoon. The Q&A, for those of you who are not familiar, it's at the bottom of your screen. You can see many of the panelists have already attempted to try to answer some of the questions from the audience. But now in the next half hour, we will have a bit more time for you to interact with the panelists. So some of the panelists have already noted that they would like to answer live. So Katerina, I'd like to invite you to come to put your video on and answer the question from Benjamin Isaac Krauss. How do you evaluate the coexistence of nonviolent civil resistance and armed resistance in the case of Ukraine? Is it a productive tension? Are they undermining each other's potential? How do you see the relationship?
Sorry, I cannot see the answer, the question.
Okay, it's would any of the other panelists like to do this while I put this in a chat to Katerina? Anyone, any other panelist willing to come online to answer that?
Sorry, Lisa, I was trying to answer the many other questions. I'm trying to go through all of them in support. Are you speaking to the question relating to the coexistence of violent and nonviolent struggle?
Yes.
Okay, there were a few questions for that, and thank you so much to those who raised them. It is an incredibly important and difficult question, which we've dealt with in many contexts when looking at the relation between the two. I don't know if it was this question specifically you're referring to, Lisa, but I saw one that also asked if you have a nonviolent action, and for example, civilians or others taking part might have Molotov cocktails or other weapons. The very real danger in that exact type of situation is that if you're having an organized nonviolent action, for example, trying to block tanks with your bodies or to engage with armed forces, to discuss with them about why the invasion is wrong, or any of a series of acts which involves civilians being physically present and using their presence and their direct engagement to try and dissuade, block, or prevent military action, the moment someone from that group would fire a weapon or throw a Molotov cocktail, it would itself break and destroy the entire logic and effectiveness of the nonviolent action, and it would make every civilian there a target and legitimize violent reprisal against them, which is why governments have often planted people in nonviolent action groups and carried out violent acts in order to create that delegitimization and to justify the violence that they will use. So it can be potentially extremely dangerous. It's not only about whether you have nonviolent strategies and violent strategies being used in a strategic theater overall, but if you mix them in an act, it puts everyone there at risk and it defeats the entire logic and the strategic effectiveness of the nonviolent action.
Katerina or Maria, would you like to add?
I guess, yeah, I would like to add that. Oh, okay, I will speak very briefly. I think, like, as a Ukrainian, I can say that it is a very productive connection, because and I can say that we certainly can't like draw a line between them, because even like non-violent civil resistance, it helped a lot for the armed resistance to achieve its goals, and it helps a lot to raise the morals of the army, because as our soldiers has seen that some people in Kherson or in Berdyansk, they protest against Russian occupation, they see that they definitely have to fight for something, and they are very encouraged. So I think that it's very productive, and yes.
Thank you. Maria.
Yeah, no, I think that was a great point, Katerina. I think that the acts of non-cooperation and the protests in areas where the Russian military are currently occupying are incredibly powerful. And it shows that the people will not cooperate. This is completely unlegitimate and the like. So I completely agree with you. I also agree with Kai that there can be challenges of mixing tactics within the same theater. So when there are nonviolent actions taking place, and we know this empirically, that the introduction of protester violence can limit participation, especially by people who are, say, not young, able-bodied men. So that's just the one area where there can be, where violent and nonviolent action kind of mix like oil and water in some cases. But I think also we need to recognize the context. Again, we're in this moment dealing with a military that has invaded another country, and it's an interstate conflict. So it's two militaries who are kind of fighting each other. What I would suggest is if, God forbid, there is a case where Russian troops occupy large parts of Ukrainian territory, which doesn't look like the case now, but if it were to happen, I would argue that disciplined nonviolent resistance in those contexts would probably be very effective. Organized mass non-cooperation, and could be more likely to prompt defections by Russian soldiers. But again, that's a kind of a different context from what we're currently looking at.
Thanks so much for those answers. Andre, I'd like to invite you to come on screen. And there's several questions here about whether international delegations, peace delegations, and citizens groups coming into Ukraine or Russia to try to be a voice for peace, do you think these would have any impact? And if so, what would they say in Russia? What would be the message to Russians at this point?
Good question. One thing that I'm trying to work on right now is to better understand what language can be applied to get through to ordinary Russians, people that have been influenced by government propaganda, that do live in this surrealistic world of Russian soldiers courageously fighting Nazism in the 21st century, things like that. How to get across to them. So that's a serious question. Obviously, what we need at this point, we need to better study. One of the things that I hope to do, as I was speaking about the need for this international nonviolent platform in support of Ukraine, one of the areas would be specifically to really study better the communications with ordinary Russian citizens. And so I would suggest for a delegation coming to Russia these days to be open and to try to study, to try to communicate with not just with like-minded people, of whom there are many, but also to communicate with ordinary people and try to better understand their state of mind, what arguments would they feel, and communicate with others. It shouldn't be just one group. If one group goes in, it's very important to share their experiences, their knowledge, whatever they were able to, conclusions that they were able to make during their trip with others, because we need to have some kind of united strategy to get across. And I just would like to say, responding to a specific question, I did respond already in the chat, but that it's right away, because unfortunately people often take for granted figures that they hear about 70% of Russian population. Russia is a dictatorship. No sociology in this sense exists in a dictatorship. And what we need to keep in mind is that it's actually amazing that under the current conditions, 30% when polled disagree. How many people disagreed with the policy of Nicolae Ceausescu 5 days before he was overthrown and shot. So dictators have 99% approval rating still a day. They're dead usually. So in the case of Russia, it's still quite different. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. There's another question here from retired Colonel Christopher Holshek, who's with the NATO Resilient Civilians Project and also the Alliance for Peace Building. He says, greetings from Madrid. And he's asking a question here about how can we on the outside best support civilian resistance and resistance in occupied areas in equally more organized and coordinated ways, as we've already seen from Ukrainians. Who would like to take that? Philippe? Karen? Kai?
I would love to, but I'd like to leave the floor and space to others first in case anyone wishes to.
Yeah, well, I can answer. Well, I think that this is the one of the most important. Thank you a lot for this proposal, and I think that one of the major of the main goals of the nonviolence campaign is to We are going to prepare a global action call where we are going to define what are the main, let's say, positions and values and goals of our platform. And we are going to launch a fundraising campaign to collect funds to support the nonviolent actors in occupied areas and liberated areas. So we think that it's very important that all those people that would like to support these actions are able to support and financially, but also it is going to be very important also to amplify and to disseminate the different messages that we are going to spread in different languages. So we are going to try to amplify the voices of nonviolent activists in the occupied areas and liberated areas. It would be great also to disseminate this information in the local, national level through media and through other type of spaces. So this was some of the ideas that came to my mind now. I don't know if you want Kai to complement other people.
Thanks, Felipe. Just to add a bit, if I could. So very practically, as Felipe has mentioned, and many on the panel here, there is an actual action group which has come together over the last 2 weeks, which has invited many of the most incredible individuals and organizations working on nonviolent action inside Ukraine, around the world. We've come together, and at first we did a very practical sharing. What are we doing already? What context do we have? Who is involved? We looked at the situation in Ukraine, Russia, Belarus, doing a quick strategic analysis together, and then identifying what are the most practical, immediate actions that need to be done. So one, we will share contact for everyone here who is interested and would like to become part of this. A group exists. We need more people to come involved. What we did at the meeting at the end of last week was we identified different action areas. There's a task force on direct nonviolent action. There's a task force on shaping communication into Russia. There's a task force on different topics. So we're trying to organize practically for immediate action and steps around different areas. We're also working and are going in these days into Ukraine to meet with Andrei, to meet with Katerina and others so that we can listen to them. And we really want to be listening to activists in Ukraine, in Russia, in Belarus, and Russian and Belarusian resistance abroad to hear from them. What are the pathways? What are the channels? How can we get support in? What is needed? So listening is an incredibly important and essential element of effective allyship and solidarity in nonviolent action. The other is for us to then also be working to engage with our populations, our media, our governments internationally to make visible the breadth of effective strategies for engaging in the war, not only to focus upon military resistance, but also to focus on how we can really support the people and populations in Ukraine, Russia, and Belarus in ending the war, and our responsibility. Unfortunately, part of the long pathway that some people wrote about that led to this war is 30 years of non-listening. And instead of at the Cold War ending, having what we had at the end of World War II, we didn't at the end of World War II build up a French and German military to continue facing each other. At the end of World War II, we systematically built platforms of alliance and solidarity and cooperation across Europe to build one of the most stable peaces the world has ever known. And at the end of the Cold War, instead of Gorbachev's vision of a common European home from Portugal to the Urals, where we would build mutual cooperation, solidarity, and engagement, we ramped up military confrontation and escalation and have been systematically violating international law for 30 years. It's not only Russia that is not calling this a war, as many people from Ukraine seem to think that this is something unusual and abnormal. The United States has not gone to war in 50 years officially, including in Vietnam. So there are many who are not calling these wars. If we want to protect law and rights, we need to do that in Yemen, in Syria, in Nigeria, in Ukraine, and everywhere. We need to stand up for that together. And so there's a lot we can do globally to recognize we need a movement now to bring about effective and intelligent ways of addressing conflicts and to move past the Neanderthalism and barbarism and the incompetence of war.
Thank you, Kai. Karen, did you want to join?
Yeah, and I'm not really addressing this to Chris because Chris, I know Chris, he's a smart and seasoned peace builder, you know. I'm really addressing this to students. And there's 2 points that I want to make. One, that before the invasion happened, as it was ramping up, I was approached by another group of people, also peace builders, who wanted to have Ukraine declared as a peace zone. I would not do that because I saw that as a violation of the sovereignty of Ukraine. And that's the kind of the point I want to make to students here, is that when we are talking about these things and planning these things as nonviolent strategies, they have to be realistic. I mean, you can declare something a peace zone, but you may as well declare it a disease-free zone or something. You know, a declaration doesn't make it so. So, and the other thing is that governments are actually very limited in what they can do. There's, you know, they can do military actions, economic sanctions, and all. Most of what's happening, especially, you know, what we're seeing happening in Ukraine, that is the nonviolent resistance, is civilian-led, not just from Ukrainians, but from all over the world. And that is really where the non-governmental peace builders have a role. And that's a very powerful role to the degree that we can organize, especially globally.
Thanks. That gets to a question that I wanted to come back to Maria about. In her book with Erica Chenoweth, they talk a lot about the need for coordination. And in many of the questions here, there's a list of other organizations that are also involved in nonviolent action and peace building. There's a question about where can people donate. So I'd like to invite the other panelists to respond on humanitarian organizations, while I ask Maria again to talk about what is the evidence that we need a coordinated response, because there's a sort of alternate theory of change of, you know, a million stars or lights. Many disaggregated approaches might work. Can you share with us what your case studies and your empirical evidence found?
Yeah, sure. So Erica Chenoweth and I, our last book together was focused on the role of external support vis-a-vis nonviolent civil resistance campaigns. And we looked at about 70 campaigns over the past few decades. And one of the real key findings from that research, and this included like the Ukrainian Orange Revolution, this included Serbia in 2000, you know, this included Tunisia, the Arab Spring Revolution, Syria, Egypt, it included Sudan. So we were looking at a wide variety of different case studies, and all of them pointed to like not only the importance of internal unity, so within the country to engage in resistance, but also the critical importance of external actor coordination and unity. So that's why, like, really in whatever countries or regions that audience members are tuning in from, the ability to organize collectively and, you know, as Kai and others said, and Andre, listening to what we're hearing from Ukrainian activists and civil society members, allowing their kind of asks and demands to kind of orient our external assistance is really key, but also just setting up mechanisms for coordination. So the All for Peace platform is critically important. For any of my former US government colleagues who may be on this call, establishing a coordination mechanism even within the US government to provide support for nonviolent activism and peace building is key. Coordinating with European and other allies. So just setting up that infrastructure is key to like avoid confusion, duplication, and to reinforce the really important nonviolent action, civil resistance activities that are happening. So probably the most important thing external actors can do is amplify the nonviolent action and coordinate their activities.
I wonder, Lisa, if I might jump in and support Maria's point with regard to defection and resistance in the Russian military, and emphasize again the point that it really would be helpful if there was a signal from the European countries, and hopefully from the Union as such, that Russian defectors, resistors are welcome, and there's mechanisms set up for them to come in. I've contacted a few representatives of governmental agencies, and they've said, well, there's a concern about Russian agents and the like, and that's legitimate. But there can be an interview process. There are ways of screening people, but this is really critically necessary. And then with that, legal support for these service members who would be, of course, putting themselves at great risk and will need support. We found this in my experience during the Vietnam days, in the early parts of the resistance. Deserters would show up and they need help and they need a home even. but especially legal help. And so whatever can be done externally to encourage that process, I think could have an impact.
Could I just mention, sorry, just super fast on what you were saying, David. So we are planning to organize immediately after the trip to Ukraine, a series of events in Brussels, including an event in the European Parliament, meeting with key actors in the European Commission. And we would encourage this to be done across all of our governments where we can, so also in North America and elsewhere. And we're working to bring a direct line to the Chinese government as well, to be engaging with them because they're a strategically critical actor. In addition to the work at the level of Brussels, if other friends are joining us from across Europe, we need to do this at national levels. But I would also say if other friends are joining us from around the world, part of what Russia is saying is that it's only Western Europe and North America that's against it. Latin America, Africa, and Asia are with us. It's really important that we engage our governments internationally all over the world to stand up and be voices for peace, stability, and security for all peoples. So if peoples around the world can get involved, and I also want to put it the other way, there is legitimately people from around the world saying, why is everyone crying out when it's war in Ukraine, and yet we have continued to suffer war for years? I'd like to say on the first hand, many have been engaging every time there's war, every time there's violence to try and assist, but we do need to do more. So there will also be webinars like this one that are coming up in the coming weeks, where we have unbelievably courageous and brilliant peace workers and youth peace workers from Yemen, from Afghanistan, from Syria, from Ukraine, coming together to call upon us all to strengthen overcoming the scourge and the plague of war.
Thank you. I want to open it up to any panelists who haven't spoken in the last while. Anyone else want to make an intervention here? I just want to add, because a combination of a number of the questions in the Q&A that are coming in have to do with sort of questions about history and whether Russians resisted Hitler, and questions about also sort of how did civil resistance really evolve in this way in this region? Because I think what we're seeing is not just something that has come up overnight, that this whole region has been preparing for such Russian aggression for many years, been practicing civil resistance. As Maria mentioned at the opening of this panel, Lithuania, Latvia, and some of the other regional actors already have civil resistance written into their national security strategies. At NATO, I know they've been also studying civil resistance, as one of our commenters had already noted. So there is sort of this growing awareness around the world that civil resistance is effective, and there's a strategy around it, and that it needs to be studied. I wonder if any of you on the panel can respond to some of the questions about, are these resources available in Russian? Are there ways of getting them into Russia or Belarus? Do you have any comments on that?
So yeah, I'll let Andre go because he knows a lot about translated materials.
Yeah, thank you. The issues are, it's possible to get things across to groups that are already, involved in war resistance and things like that in Belarus and Russia. Of course, in Belarus, it might be a little more difficult right now because the most active folks are outside of the country today. But it's possible to get things in. The important thing, though, is to get materials out to the wider circle, the more general public, and that's where we need to really think creatively.
Thanks, Maria.
Yeah, I completely agree with Andre. And I think, again, as we're talking about this need for kind of global democratic solidarity, now's the time to be investing in these kind of materials. And, the International Center on Nonviolent Conflict has a ton of translated materials, articles, videos, kind of memes, booklets, guides that exist. But as Andre said, they need to be adapted and tailored to the local context. Like, just the phrasing, the words, the humor, all of this needs to be developed, together with activists and organizers from the region. So like, again, now is the time to demand that there be more investments in this type of work, because the more people who have access to these materials written in languages and in graphics that they understand and can pick up, the stronger the movement and the civil resistance will be. So I think this is a really important investment that international organizations, NGOs, and certainly governments can make to get this material out there.
Philippe and Katerina, does your initiative have any ambitions to respond here?
Yeah, well, I would like to say that so if we analyze the different civil resistance chapters in Ukraine, we also see that there are a lot of connections between let's say what we call the color revolutions, the Rose Revolution in Georgia, the connections with the Orange Revolution are quite clear. There are different reports and articles about that. We have been engaged from our organization for supporting nonviolent movements in Palestine, Western Sahara, Ukraine, and other countries for a long time. We have been organizing trainings with different youth activists from all these countries. For example, before the Euromaidan, we have been working with Opora, a very important organization in Ukraine, organizing trainings, translating materials. So I will have to say that I think that it's very important that all these activists that are organizing actions today are people that they know how to organize civil resistance. Maybe there is a need for more coordination between these groups. I think that this is one of the key priorities for our platform. But I think that will be also very important that we are able also to make connections between these groups and also colleagues from Belarus. For example, our special activists working in the diaspora from Belarus, they are going to organize before summer social transformation school, where they would like to have activists and nonviolent actors from different countries, and they will be in contact with Ukrainians and Russian activists. And also they're offering themselves to mentor other Russian citizens and activists to confront also the power in Russia. So I would say that there are materials, there are also capacities. We just need to organize in a more systematic way and to create a more systematic, let's say, capacity building process, to expand these strategies, in the whole population.
Thank you. Katerina, any additions? It's fine if you, okay. There's two more questions here in our last couple minutes. Kai, can you say one more word about All for Peace and what that is? And then Karen, can you give a word on the role of religious actors?
Thank you, Lisa. So many people have spoken to All for Peace, and it is an initiative to create a global platform to provide direct support for nonviolent action in Ukraine, in Russia, in Belarus, and a platform which can catalyze and support our organizing for nonviolent action around the world on this context. It is open. There are at least 20 organizations that have been part of the discussion so far. A number are coming together to go and meet with Andrei and Natalia and others in Ukraine now. We're going to get up a website soon. Many people have been asking about where the statement that Philippe mentioned. Lisa, Philippe, and I need to really get active on writing it, and others as well. And the moment we do, we'll be putting it out everywhere. We need volunteers and people who can become involved in helping to create the platform, people who want to become involved in raising support and awareness in their communities. And if you want to become directly engaged in this support, please do reach out to us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And last word from Reverend Karen.
This is actually rather complex because I'm an ordained Christian minister, and yet I find that when I am in a room of other Christians that I am more afraid of the other Christians than I am of Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, etc. Not because they're going to hurt me, but there's a very good chance they're going to turn on me. And so I think it's really important that there is absolutely a role for religious leaders and for religiously led, spiritually led people in peace building. It is fundamentally a spiritual exercise. Almost every program we do is fundamentally rooted in a spiritual principle. For instance, when we go to Ukraine, me and the U.S. team, we plan to go and do a tour of Ukraine as soon as we can, and that's a speaking tour. And I will be speaking about from the last chapter of the Gospel of John, when the apostles were out fishing, and the stranger at the shore told them to throw their nets out on the other side, and they brought up 400 some fish. So there's a specific number, and I can't remember right now, but it's a specific number of fish that's specified in the Gospel of John. And that is important because it happens to coincide with the number of species of fish that the scientists at the time of that writing believed existed in the world. So when they pulled up that number of fish, what they were pulling up was a representative of every one. And so that's what the talk will be about. That's what my speaking point will be about, is that none are left out. Nobody is left out. And I think it's important that, yes, we work from spiritual principles, but they have to be universal. And they have to be ones that Muslims and Hindus and Buddhists, etc., can all hear. We can't assume that we own the dominion. We shouldn't even use language that implies that. I think that's kind of the point of that last chapter of the Gospel of John, is that the Great Commission isn't to go out to make disciples. It's to get people to love God. It's to go out and tell people God loves them. That it's really the reverse of what so many people believe the Great Commission is. And so to go out and spread love, and I don't mean that in the all you need is love sense, but in the real gritty, what are you willing to do to make sure that I have my rights, to make sure that I have food, that I have shelter, that real love is exercised here with me and with everybody that you can possibly reach out and embrace around the world.
Thank you so much, Karen, for those final words. Thanks to all of the panelists for joining us. Some of you still from within Ukraine, others on the panel are on their way to Ukraine. For those of you who pray, keep them in your prayers. Thank you for joining us today.